So today we're going to look at players that needs to have a bounce back year for their respective team, and we're going to first look at the Eastern Conference. With tomorrow, I'm going to look at the Western Conference and look at each of these teams and one player from each of these teams that needs to have a bounce back year. And most of these guys have to do with the fact that they had a rough season last year and that they're hoping to look to bounce back heading into this upcoming season. But there are some that is injury related that they were out for the majority of the season, and I know for sure they have definitely good quality to be a decent player for their team, and they're looking to try to bounce back after they suffer that injury that pretty much kept them out for majority of the season. And there are also a couple of teams that I actually had a bit of a tough choice to choose who exactly is the specific player that I think is going to have a bounce back year. So expect there's going to be honorable mention in terms of when I get to each of these teams, where I'm going to give audible mention to some of these guys that I could have easily put here on the board. And to start off, we go with Atlanta United in the Eastern Conference, and I'm going to go with Miles Robinson. So speaking of honorable mention, I will give an honorable mention to Ezekiel Barco as a guy that I think needs to have a bounce back year, and this has been the case ever since he arrived with Atlanta United, where there was a lot of hype surrounding Barco could be the next best thing, and he could be the next Miguel Almiron, and unfortunately it just have never happened. And I could also say the same thing about Pity Martinez, although Pity Martinez is no longer with Atlanta United and no longer in the league. But I decided to go with Miles Robinson, and I kind of decided to go with him because I know for sure that for the remaining of the list, I don't think I actually have a defender on this. Or actually, I do have one. I think one defender on this list in terms of players that needs to have a bounce back year for their respective team. And I don't want to just go fully choosing an attacker, and people will think that I only look on the attacking part of the game and I forget about the defensive part of the game, which I know the league, in terms of how it is more attacking focus, and that people kind of forget that there are some really good defender in the league, and the old saying, defense is definitely a lost art. Well, in some way it's kind of the case in this day of age of MLS. But going back to this, talking about how I think Miles Robinson should have a bounce back year. Yeah, I mean, last season was a total regression from Miles Robinson, and I remember when he first break into this Atlanta team and had that breakout year a couple of years ago, and I think it was 2019 that he had that breakout year. A lot of people were talking about how this is the future U.S. men's national team center back, and that he is going to really not only be solidified in the back line for Atlanta, but he could maybe be another young American that potentially is going to get some European interest. And then this year happened. Yeah, the Miles Robinson, along with pretty much almost every single Atlanta player, had major regression. But this is one that I definitely did not expect it, and that I hope he might have a bounce back year this year, because clearly he is definitely a player that I think could have a chance to become a future U.S. men's national team player. And if he is still going to be reconsider and maybe even break into the youth national team, he definitely needs to have a bounce back year this season. The Chicago Fire, I'm gonna go with Ignacio Aliseda. So this was a player that I think I gone with as my most disappointing player when I did the Moving Forward series for the Chicago Fire, and it's for good reason why I think he was the most disappointing player, because with most of the signing that the Fire made last offseason, which they done a lot of signing last offseason, most of them kind of paid off, except for Ignacio Aliseda, who they made him as a DP last offseason, and he only contributed 1 goal and 2 assists during that time. So yeah, there's no doubt that number is clearly nowhere near close to be DP worthy of number, and that the Fire are really hoping that he's going to have a bounce back year, because otherwise this could be another case where we see a team sign a DP and they think that he's going to contribute with the team, and yeah, it turns out it was a huge bust. And that for Aliseda, if he is not going to consider himself one of those bust kind of DP player, he needs to perform heading into his second season with the Chicago Fire. For FC Cincinnati, and this one was kind of tough because, for Cincinnati, I could have gone with a lot of different players on this team. I could have maybe even gone with everybody on this team that needs to have a bounce back year, because pretty much everyone on that FC Cincinnati team last season clearly underachieved. But I think the player that clearly underachieved the most was Jurgen Lacatia. I mean, after all the hypes around last off season, after people were thinking that he might be the guy that will solve the big issue that FC Cincinnati had in their inaugural year. Well, one of the big issue that they had in their inaugural year, which was goal scoring. And it turns out that was just not the case whatsoever, and he just become one of the most cursed number 9 in last season, only scoring 1 goal, or actually no, he scored two goals last season, but only one of them came in open play, and that was all the way back on opening day against the Red Bulls, and then the other one was just a penalty kick that he converted against, I believe it was Orlando City, or no, it was against Portland in the MLS is back tournament. So there's no doubt that he is hoping he's going to have a bounce back year. I'm kind of surprised that they decided to keep him for another year, but at the same time, I just realized that he's actually on loan with Brighton, and that his loan clause actually doesn't expire until the summer of this upcoming season. So, for Jurgen Lacatia, if he wants to stay with FC Cincinnati, and I know he said before that he loves Cincinnati and that he wants to be staying with this club for the foreseeable future, he needs to have a big year, because otherwise I don't see FC Cincinnati potentially bring him back once that loan does expire. And that I also think Lacadia does have some competition now, because with FC Cincinnati decide to once again splash out the cash and decide to get themselves a number 9 that can definitely fix their goal scoring woes, that is Bernier. It's going to be interesting to see whether or not if Lacadia is going to get some playing minutes, or maybe he along with Bernier is going to pretty much be part of the starting 11, and FC Cincinnati is just going to go with 2 number 9 going forward, and hope that is a way to solve their big issue of not being able to score goals. Now, for the Columbus Crew, the defending champion, I was actually thinking about putting no one on this, and tomorrow I will give you guys kind of a spoiler and say that I did put one team where I decided to say no one onto the next to the team, because I didn't think there was anybody that really needs to have a bounce back year. And the same would say with the Crew, where I thought last season in their MLS Cup run, it was really a collective team effort, and that there was really no guys that I thought had a down year, and that they necessarily need to bounce back heading into this upcoming season. But I'm actually going to go with Vito Wormgoor, and this is where I talked about early, where some of these guys that I put here on this board that needs to have a bounce back year isn't because of the fact that they had a rough season, but it's more like they had a injury that kind of kept them out for the majority of the season, or in this case for Vito Wormgoor, it was kind of sad to see that during that MLS is back tournament, he suffered that torn ACL that kind of kept him out for the rest of the season, and basically he wasn't able to be part of this MLS Cup winning team for the majority seat. Well, he was still part of it, but he didn't play part in terms of playing games with this team. And that, I think Vito Wormgoor is definitely a good defender for this Crew team. Like, he definitely showed that in the first couple of games before he went down with a torn ACL, and now knowing the fact that he is going to be coming back to this Crew team. And I already talked about how this Crew team is already loaded with how the roster is, and pretty much every position is too deep. And with Wormgoor coming back, I think he is going to be maybe a starter for that back line alongside with Jonathan Mensah. But when you look at that position too, he also has some competition in that position too. So I think even though I know maybe for sure that Wormgoor is going to be coming back as part of that back line for the Crew, don't be surprised that might not be the case, and that he's going to have some serious competition that he needs to deal with heading into this upcoming season because of how the crew are really stacked heading into this season. For DC United, I'm going to go with Julian Gresso. And this is another team that I had a couple of players that I could have gone with. I could have easily gone with Edison Flores, their big DP that really was a huge disappointment and probably one of the more disappointing signing from last season, although he did spend more time on the IR than was actually playing on the pitch, so it's understandable why his number wasn't what they expected when they signed him as a DP. I could have even gone with Ola Kamara, who was part of a big main issue that DC had last season, which is they can't score goals. But in the end, I got to go with Julian Gresso, and a player that I think probably have one of the most disappointing and one of the most surprising disappointing year in the league has to be Julian Gresso, because this was a guy that was considered the best versatile player in the league when he was with Atlanta. And when I saw how DC was able to acquire him for about 600,000 GAM, and I even made a specific video talking about this, and that not only the fact that this is an absolute steal for DC United, but I was thinking, what on earth is Atlanta thinking? Decided to get rid of one of their more important players and even one of their fan favorite to a nearby rival. And it turns out, for once, Atlanta kind of maybe is a little bit smart and find out that, yeah, it turns out Julian Gresso is going to have a big regression of the year, or at least they predicted that he was going to have a big regression of a year, and that's why they decided to sell him off to DC United. Now, that being said, as I talk about how nobody expected that he had a down year like this, again, it's really the case where it was kind of a mystery how much of a regression that Julian Gresso took. I guess maybe some of there are maybe hints of the mystery of why he took such a big regression has to do with him not playing in the position that he has. I know throughout last season when Ben Olsen was still taking charge of this team, Julian Gresso have numerous times complained about how he wasn't playing in the position that he liked. And even though we know Julian Gresso is a versatile player, he definitely deserved to play in one specific position, and I believe it's the fullback position that he wants to play. But yeah, I hope that maybe he is going to have a bounce back year heading into this upcoming season, and maybe with now a new head coach that might give him the position that he prefer to play in this roster. Maybe he's going to have a bounce back year this season with DC United, and won't look like the player that he was when he was with Atlanta a couple of years ago. Now, moving on to Inter Miami, and this is another one that I could have gone with a lot of different players, but in the end, I'm going to go with the safe pick and go with Gonzalo Higuain. And I know this one was pretty obvious whenever I get to Inter Miami, where people know that I was going to go with Gonzalo Higuain. But again, there were definitely some notable candidate that I could have gone with. I could have easily gone with Rodolfo Pizarro. I could have even gone with Matheus Pellegrini or Julian Carenza, or I could have even gone with the player that we still don't know if this was an illegal signing for Inter Miami, that is Blaise Matuidi. And again, I have heard nothing from the league of whether or not if they have made this decision to either punish Inter Miami for illegally signing Blaise Matuidi on a TAM contract or not. But either way, as much as Matuidi at that time was a big bit of a steal, yeah, he had a really bad year, and he really regrets heading into his time with Inter Miami. But I think probably the player that, as I mentioned, is an easy choice of a player that needs to have a bounce back year is Gonzalo Higuain. And you talk about big bust player, and a player that could potentially be one of the biggest bust DP signing of all time. Gonzalo Higuain is definitely going to be on verge of that, because Inter Miami paid $7 million for him, and the fact that they only got him scoring one goal, which was that wonderful free kick against the Red Bulls, but yeah, only one goal last season, and you pay $7 million for him. Yeah, you better hope he is going to have a bounce back year heading into this upcoming season, because, as I said, he could be one of the biggest busts and one of the worst DP signing of all all time, probably right up there with potentially Chicharito, which I'll talk about tomorrow again, how he could also be a really big bust with the amount that the Galaxy pay for him, and Chicharito, just like Higuain, kind of had a very similar their kind of numbers from last season, where they were signed by by big clubs with big amount of money, and they turns out to be a huge flop when they play for their respective MLS team. Moving on, we got Montreal, who I'm gonna say Victor Vanyama as the player that needs to have a bounce back year. So this was another kind of high profile kind of name. I mean, I wouldn't say Victor Wanyama is kind of a high profile name, but he's a well known name if you follow the Premier League very closely, where he played for Spurs and also with Southampton, and even spent a quick stint with Celtic before he went to the Premier League. And that when Montreal did get Victor Wanyama, a lot of people thought that this was definitely going to be a good signing, because Wanyama is kind of a player that, even though you think that he's been in the game for a long time, he's still relatively young and kind of still right around his prime. So the fact that he had such a disappointing year like he did last season was kind of a big mystery. And especially last season, I don't think he actually spent a lot of time on the IR, which that's been one of the thing that kind of have derailed Wanyama career, where he has spent more time on the IR than actually on the football pitch. But you know, last season definitely was a down year for him, and Montreal will really hope that he can potentially bounce back heading into this season and kind of rediscover that good form that he had during the days when he was playing against Premier League teams like for the Spurs and Southampton. For Nashville, I am gonna go with Abu Denladi, and I know some people have already said this is a bust. Denladi is going to be considered one, if not the biggest bust, number one pick in the Super Draft, because we have seen what happened for the past couple of years, where he has not only regressed to be a really bad player, but people are kind of giving up and thinking that he will never live up to the potential. And this is just an example of a kid that had so much hype after he had an incredible year with Minnesota in 2017, and he never lived up to that expectation. But for me, I'm not one of those people. I still think he can definitely be a decent player, and that I still believe that Denladi one day is going to rediscover that good form that he had with 2017. And you can call me deluded all you want, but something tells me that he is going to get back to that form. And that, you know, I think last year he didn't really get a lot of playing time with this team, and I expect this year probably is going to be the same case. You know, even though Nashville isn't really that loaded in terms of going forward, they have already know who exactly they're going to start going forward, and Denladi is kind of buried a little bit down the depth chart. But you know, in case if he doesn't perform with Nashville and they decide to train to another team, I really believe that he could potentially get traded to another team, maybe a lesser team that maybe are not like a playoff contender in MLS, and that he's going to probably get more minutes. And once he does start to get more minutes, you know, then I'll see whether or not if he is going to continue to hopefully rediscover his form that he had in 2017. Because as much as, again, I know a lot of people are already saying that he was a huge bust with the way that the last couple of years have went, I think it's kind of unfair, the fact that he hasn't really got a lot of playing minutes. And then of course he had that injury woes during his time with Minnesota before arriving at Nashville. And that I truly believe if he's able to get enough minutes and maybe stay off of those injury woes, he could definitely rediscover his good form that he had during his first season in MLS, and in that 2017 form that Abu Denladi had with Minnesota. But moving on, we got New England, and this was really between Adam Buksa and Gustavo Bou as the player that I would chose for the player that needs to have a comeback year. And in the end, I'm going to go with Buksa, mainly because Gustavo Bou last year, you know, despite his number was definitely down from his previous season. He did kind of had to navigate a couple of injury walls and did spend times on the IR. And eventually, when he did come back, he did score that incredible goal against Montreal to give New England a chance to play in the knockout stage against the Union. Which in that game, Adam Buksa, of course, would score the winning goal to make them move on to the conference semifinal against Orlando City. But I still are going to stick with Buksa because unlike Bo, he didn't really spend any time on the IR table, and really he just was a terrible striker for this team. And he got so bad that at one point Bruce Arena had to bench him because he was just so out of form, and that him alongside with Jurgen Lacatia was kind of belong in that cursed number 9 club where apparently those are the strikers that aren't allowed to score a goal for their respective team. But eventually he did kind of picked up near the end of the year, and that hopefully New England will hope that with him kind of picking up form near the end of the year will be a sign where he is going to kind of continue that heading into this upcoming season, because this is another DP player where if he does not perform heading into this upcoming season, this could be one of the bigger bust signing by a team with New England paying big buck to able to get Adam Buksa last off season, and he turns out to really be a huge flop to this team. But moving on, we got the New York Red Bulls, and I'm going to go with Daniel Royer, who probably had the worst year for the Red Bulls last season, and it was really surprising how bad Royer was last year, because Royer, alongside with BWP of all these years with the Red Bulls, are considered the most consistent player for this Red Bulls team. And last season, I don't know what happened, but where he just completely fell off a cliff and just does not look like that same Daniel Royer player that we know for the Red Bulls for the past couple of years. Now, I guess maybe this is just an example for where maybe he just kind of had a down year, and then he can kind of maybe have a bounce back year heading into this season. And we of course see this happen a lot of time, where even some of the best players in the world, they might have a year where they might have a down year there, but eventually they are going to be bounced back in their incredible form that they had before. And I really believe Danny Roy is going to be that player where there's no way in the world. And also, I don't know why I put an S there. It's actually Daniel Roy, not Daniel Royce. But yeah, I expect Daniel Roy should be back to his old self heading into this upcoming season, and will be one of the key attacking contributor for this Red Bulls team. But moving on, we got NYCFC, and this one is pretty easy. Although there are some notable candidates I could have chose for NYCFC. I could have even gone with fellow number 9 Tati Castillanos, who, besides that hat trick game he had against the Red Bulls in the Hudson River Derby, he had another underwhelming year, and it just gets to a point where, is Tati Castellano is going to kind of consider a bust after an incredible year that he had with NYCFC when he first came to the league, and then he just kind of continued to regress down the years. But it's obvious that I have to choose Bear as a player that needs to have a bounce back year. And talk about another guy that belonged in the club of cursed striker, and a player that just seems like he's not allowed to score a goal for his team. Bear was a good example of that, where he had that miserable run where he wasn't able to score a goal no matter what he tried. And when he finally was able to score a goal, and finally it looked like maybe things were going to turn around for him, he of course suffered a torn ACL, and his season is pretty much done. Now, with that torn ACL happening right around I believe the second phase, or actually the first phase of last season, most likely he's probably not going to come back until the middle of this season. But at the same time, when he does come back with this team, I'm really hoping he's going to have a bounce back year, because there is no way in the world you see a guy that when he came to NYCFC, where he was able to bang in 10 plus goal, and everybody's thought that this not only was a diamond in the rough signing that NYCFC just got, but they might have found themselves a sure number 9, and then last season happened. So yeah, I really hope Bear will recover well heading into this upcoming season, and once he does come back from that nasty torn ACL injury, he's going to be back in form and try not to look like the Bear of last season, where for whatever reason he just cannot score goals. But moving on, for Orlando City, I am gonna go with Tesha Akindele. Now, Orlando City was another team that I didn't really had a lot of players I was going to choose as players that needs to have a bounce back year, because pretty much most of the players on this team really live up to its expectation, and some even exceed their expectation heading into or they exceed expectation last season. But one player that did not do that is Tesha Akindele, and I fear Tesha Akindele might be getting the Dom Dwyer treatment at Orlando City, where he has really felt down the depth chart with him being ineffective in terms of the goal scoring department last season. And with Orlando City have already looked pretty stacked in terms of going up front, you wonder if Tesha Akindele is going to get another chance. Maybe he might get another chance in the beginning of the season, because with no Daryl DK there, I'm assuming maybe he's going to get a shot to be the number 9 for Orlando City. But that being said, I just remembered they got Alexandre Pato this off season, and yeah, he's going to be back in terms of being third on that forward depth chart for Orlando City. But in case of Oscar Pereira is going to maybe give him some chances, and I know Oscar Pereira is kind of a guy that are going to be able to give player chances, even players that might look out of form. He still is able to give them some chances to get themselves some playing time, and maybe get themselves out of a bad form that they're in. Hopefully that will be a way for Tesha Akindele to get some minutes, because again, if that is not going to be the case, then unfortunately he's going to end up the same as Dom Dwyer, where remember how Dom Dwyer was an incredible player both for Sporting KC and then with doing his time with Orlando City. Yeah, that things kind of unravel, and it all kind of started with some injury situation that he had before he basically just never was the same, and finally was let go by Orlando City this off season. But moving on, we got the Philadelphia Union, and this was another club that I could have easily said no one, because there really isn't a lot of player on this team that I think had a bad year that needs to have a bounce back. But I'm going to say Casper Chabilco, and I know Chabilco, he of course picked things up last season, but for the first part of last season, he was definitely one of those striker that, as I mentioned, with of a club where if you belong in this cursed number 9 club, which is a striker that is not allowed to score a goal for a team, I thought Chabilco was kind of part of that club. Now, eventually, he kind of got out of the club when he was able to score a goal, and he kind of did what classic strikers usually do, which is when you finally able to score a goal to end your goal drought, you started to get a couple of goals in, and hopefully for the Union, they hope that maybe that good form that he had in the second half of the season is going to continue heading into this season, because I think at least for the first half of the season, Chabilco kind of had a relatively down year, and that if you kind of take away from what happened in the second half of the season, I'm going to kind of put him as one of the players that needs to have a bounce back year. And again, this does kind of feel like a little bit picky, because I can't just ignore what he did in the second half of the season, but at the same time, I really don't want to put any team here and say no one on this team that needs to have a comeback year, even though I know tomorrow when I do the Western Conference version, there is going to be one team where I'm going to put no one on next to their name as the players that needs to have a bounce back year. And then finally, the last player that I'm going to go for that needs to have a bounce back year for Toronto, and that's none other than Josie Altidore. Now, this could be it for Josie, and how this could be his final season with TFC, knowing the fact that there's already rumors of the fact that TFC is looking for a replacement, and that they have been trying to get River Plate striker Rafael Santos for, and many people thought that he's going to be the replacement for Josie Altidore. Although the more that I kind of read of what type of player that Rafael Santos Bor is, the more I kind of think that's not really a replacement for Josie Altidore, but more kind of a replacement for Pablo Piatti that they lost this off season. But still, the main replacement for Josie Altidore is Ayo Akinyona, and you know, with Josie knowing the fact that, you know, this might be his final year, hopefully he's going to have one more good season with this team. I mean, you know, with the way that he has kind of really struggled in terms of fitness and has not looked like the same Josie that we know from the past couple of years, that is one of the most lethal striker in this league. You know, I'm just hoping that first he gets his fitness well, but second, hopefully this might be one last hurrah and kind of maybe having a Chris Wondolowski type of year where, you know this could be your last season with your team, and maybe even be your last season in your career, and then you just want to give everything you got before you depart, because you want to have a good set off with a team, and that's the case with Josie Altidore, where hopefully he's going to have one last good year before, most likely, I think Toronto is going to move on from Josie heading into next off season. I haven't actually really looked to see when exactly his contract is up, but I'm assuming it's probably going to be up pretty soon. And once his contract is up, I am pretty much convinced that Toronto is probably not going to re-sign him to a contract, knowing the fact that he has really started to get to a point where, like pretty much a lot of players that is getting into their 30s, they started to slow down and are just no longer going to be at their top of the game as they were during their prime of their career. But yeah, there you have it. That is pretty much it for this video, and I know this was a relatively long video, and hopefully I'll keep it a little bit short heading into the Western Conference version. But let me know in the comments below, what do you think of all these players that I picked that needs to have a bounce back year? If there is any player that you disagree here on this list, let me know in the comments below. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.